Trust is a thin thread spun from glass. You never hear it break until it's too late. But on April 15, 2023, in the heart of Atlanta, that thread shattered with devastating consequences, leaving a trail of broken lives in its wake. Darius Mensah moved through life like a shadow at sunset, stretching long and dark across the lives he touched. At 34, he cut an impressive figure in Atlanta's social circles, the kind of man who could silence a room with just his presence. Standing 6 feet tall and always impeccably dressed in tailored suits, his smile could disarm even the most guarded heart. Yet beneath that carefully crafted exterior lurked something far more sinister. His victims would later describe his eyes as still waters hiding undertow, calm on the surface but deadly beneath. By day, he was the charismatic investment advisor at Peachtree Financial, the man who remembered everyone's coffee order and always held the door. By night, he methodically orchestrated a campaign of devastation that would eventually touch 17 lives across 3 states. In each city, Atlanta, Charlotte, Nashville, he left behind the same calling card: shattered trust and irreversibly altered futures. Enter Latoya Bennett, 29, a critical care nurse at Emory University Hospital. For 6 years, she had built a life of quiet dedication, working double shifts in the ICU while pursuing her master's degree. In her tiny midtown apartment, with its postage stamp balcony overlooking the city lights, she found solace in small rituals: chamomile tea at midnight, journal entries by candlelight, and dawn yoga before her 7 a.m. shifts. Her colleagues knew her as the nurse who could calm even the most agitated patients with her steady hands and gentle voice. On that fateful Tuesday morning in March, as cherry blossoms painted Atlanta's streets in pink, Latoya first crossed paths with Darius in the hospital cafeteria. Their eyes met over the coffee counter, and something in his smile made her pulse quicken, though later she would wish it had been from fear rather than attraction. He ordered a black coffee, 2 sugars, and left a $20 tip for the barista. It was the kind of gesture that made people remember him fondly until they had reason not to. But this isn't a story about the deceptive nature of first impressions or the cruel tricks of fate. This is a story about justice served cold, survival against impossible odds, and how sometimes the deepest wounds forge the strongest warriors. In the months that followed that chance encounter, Atlanta would witness a case that shook the foundations of trust and reshaped the landscape of personal injury law forever. What unfolded between March and December of that year became more than just another headline in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It became a testament to human resilience, a cautionary tale for the digital age, and a stark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators wear the most convincing smiles. In the spring of 2023, Latoya's world revolved around the rhythms of Unit 7C at Emory University Hospital and her 650-square-foot sanctuary on Peachtree Street. Her apartment might have been modest, but she had transformed it into something distinctly her own. An African violet on the windowsill, a collection of medical journals stacked neatly beside her grandmother's inherited armchair, and the vision board above her desk, mapping out the path to her dream home in Virginia Highland. Each night at 11:43 p.m., after her evening shifts, she would curl up in that worn leather armchair, penning thoughts into a leather-bound journal, a habit she had maintained since her first day of nursing school in 2018. Between its pages lay the quiet confessions of a woman who spent her days saving others, but struggled to make time for herself. Another Saturday night with Netflix and takeout, she wrote on March 12th. Mom called again about setting me up with her church friend's son. When did being single at 29 become a family crisis? By day, she was the nurse who could start an IV in a single try, who remembered every patient's allergies without checking the chart, who fought for better staffing ratios and won. But in the softness of evening, vulnerability crept in. Her finger would hover over dating app profiles, her dark eyes lingering on the family photo from her brother's wedding, the one where everyone had a +1 except her. Their paths crossed again on March 23rd, beyond that initial cafeteria encounter. This time, in the hospital parking garage level P3, as thunder rolled across the Atlanta skyline. His umbrella appeared over her head before the first drops fell. "I've been hoping to run into you again," he said, his cologne, sandalwood and something uniquely masculine, mingling with the rain-charged air. His hand brushed hers as he walked her to her car, and that touch carried weight, intention, promise. April unfolded like a fever dream. Lunch breaks stretched into dinner dates at Marcel on the west side, where Darius ordered in flawless French and spoke of his dreams to start a charitable foundation. Yet when she asked about his family, his answers skated across the surface like stones on water, never quite breaking through. "They're up north," he'd say, "or we're not close anymore." Each deflection came gift-wrapped in another story about his latest investment success or a client's glowing praise. May brought roses to her nurse's station every Wednesday, always white, always with cards signed in his distinctive slanted script. June saw weekend trips to Savannah, where he knew every chef by name, but somehow never ran into old friends. By July, she was keeping a toothbrush at his Buckhead penthouse, even as he made excuses about never staying at her place. "The location isn't convenient for my morning meetings." The red flags fluttered like crimson ribbons in the wind. The mysterious phone calls that pulled him away mid-dinner. The business trips that stretched from 2 days to 5 without explanation. The way his stories sometimes shifted, like Atlanta's spring weather. But by then, Latoya had already begun to see her future in the reflection of his carefully crafted smile. On her birthday, August 15th, she caught her own reflection in the cracked mirror of her bathroom, a spider web fracture from where she had bumped it with a bottle of his favorite cologne the week before. The sight gave her pause, a moment of prescience she would later wish she had heeded. In her journal that night, she wrote words that would haunt her. "Sometimes perfect things make me nervous. Maybe that's why the crack in my mirror feels like a warning I can't quite understand." September brought more than autumn to Atlanta. By the equinox, Latoya's carefully ordered world began showing hairline fractures. The hands that had threaded countless IVs now trembled over patient charts. The stairs to Unit 7C, once barely noticed, left her breathing hard by the 3rd floor. Night sweats soaked her sheets, yet she blamed the Georgia humidity. "Just fighting off a bug," she told concerned colleagues, even as dark circles deepened beneath her eyes like bruises that wouldn't fade. On October 2nd, during a routine blood draw for her annual certification, Dr. Sarah Chen's gaze lingered too long on Latoya's lab results. "Let's run some additional tests," she said, her voice carrying that careful neutrality that medical professionals reserve for their gravest concerns. The fluorescent lights of the employee health clinic buzzed like angry wasps as Latoya sat through blood draw after blood draw, each vial a question mark drawn in red. October 15th, 2:47 p.m. The world shifted on its axis in an antiseptic exam room on the 4th floor. "The HIV test came back positive," Dr. Chen said, her words falling like stones into still water. "We'll need to begin treatment immediately." The clock on the wall ticked forward, indifferent to the way time seemed to freeze in Latoya's lungs. Her medical training offered no shelter from the tsunami of comprehension. She knew exactly what this meant, every implication, every altered possibility. That evening, she stood in Darius's penthouse, her hands gripping a marble countertop that cost more than her annual salary. He appeared utterly unsurprised by her news, as if she'd merely commented on the weather. "I was wondering when you'd find out," he said, swirling imported scotch in a crystal glass. The casual cruelty of his indifference struck harder than any dramatic revelation could have. "How long have you known?" The words scraped out of her throat like broken glass. "About my status, 8 years. He took another sip, his reflection fragmenting in the glass wall behind him. "About what I was doing from the beginning." "How many others?" "Does it matter?" His smile hadn't changed, that same charming curve that had first caught her eye in the cafeteria. Only now she saw it for what it was, a shark's grin before the bite. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Latoya pulled out her journal, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself staring at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. The spiderweb fracture now seemed prophetic. She traced its lines with her fingertip, following each path of destruction, each choice that had led her here. The African violet on her windowsill had withered, its leaves curled inward like fists. She hadn't noticed when it started dying, just as she hadn't noticed so many other warning signs. In the harsh light of her bathroom, reality crystallized with brutal clarity. Every romantic dinner, every thoughtful gesture, every seemingly heartfelt conversation, all had been calculated steps in a methodical campaign of destruction. The realization didn't break her. It crystallized something inside her, something harder than trust and sharper than betrayal. As October's moon rose over Atlanta's skyline, Latoya Bennett made a decision that would alter not only her future, but the lives of countless others. This wasn't going to be a story of victimhood. It would be a testimony of justice. On October 17, 2023, at precisely 9:43 a.m., Latoya Bennett walked into the Atlanta Police Department's Special Victims Unit. Detective Marina Santos, a 15-year veteran with eyes that had seen too much, listened as Latoya's story unfolded. "There will be others," Latoya said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Someone needs to stop him." The investigation began like a pebble dropped in still water, one ripple leading to another, each circle wider than the last. Darius Mensah, they discovered, wasn't even his real name. Dennis Morrison in Charlotte, Daniel Matthews in Nashville. Different names, same devastating pattern. Each identity crafted with surgical precision, complete with fabricated references and carefully curated social media profiles dating back years. By Halloween, Detective Santos had uncovered 7 victims across 3 states. Sarah Coleman, 34, a former Olympic hopeful whose diving career ended with her diagnosis. Rebecca Chen, 28, who lost custody of her daughter when her ex-husband learned of her status. Maria Gonzalez, 31, whose small business collapsed under the weight of mounting medical bills. Each woman's story echoed with the same haunting refrain: charming man, whirlwind romance, devastating betrayal. November 3rd brought the first breakthrough. A bank teller in Charlotte recognized his photo, not as Dennis Morrison, but as Daniel Matthews, who'd opened accounts there in 2022. Security footage revealed the same elegant suits, the same practiced smile, but different victims on his arm at different times. The carefully constructed facades began to crack. On November 15th, during a raid of his Buckhead penthouse, investigators discovered a leather-bound notebook hidden in a wall safe. Inside, in meticulous handwriting, lay a chronicle of destruction, dates, names, locations. He'd documented everything, treating lives like stock portfolios, measuring success in shattered dreams rather than dollar signs. The investigation unveiled a pattern spanning 6 years and 3 states. 17 women in total, each selected with calculated precision. Successful professionals, independent spirits, women with everything to lose. Bank records showed regular transfers to offshore accounts, suggesting a network that stretched beyond American borders. December 1st, World AIDS Day, brought the final piece of evidence. A former colleague from his Charlotte days recognized his photo on the evening news and came forward with emails, dozens of them, showing his premeditation. The game, he'd written in one, is about more than the infection. It's about watching them realize everything they believed about trust was a lie. On December 12th, as Atlanta's early winter twilight painted the sky in shades of steel, the FBI's fugitive task force found Darius at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. He was boarding a flight to Dubai, a one-way ticket to a country with no extradition treaty. His arrest played out against the backdrop of Gate C7, his composed facade cracking only when the steel cuffs clicked shut. But it wasn't the federal agents who made him flinch. It was Latoya Bennett, standing quietly to the side, watching justice unfold with clear, steady eyes. In that moment, the predator finally faced what he'd created. Not a victim, but a warrior who'd turned her pain into purpose. As he was led away, she lifted her phone and hit send on a message to Detective Santos's task force. Number 18 just called the hotline. It's time to end this story. January 15th, 2024. Fulton County Superior Court, Courtroom 4A. Outside, Atlanta shivered under a rare blanket of snow. Inside, 18 women sat shoulder to shoulder on hard wooden benches, their collective strength warming the austere chamber more than any heating system could. Judge Evelyn Martinez presided, her 23 years on the bench etched in the stern lines around her mouth. The air hung thick with anticipation as Darius Mensah entered in orange prison garb, his buckhead polish stripped away, but that unnerving calm still present in his eyes. The prosecution presented their evidence with methodical precision. The leather notebook, offshore accounts totaling $2.3 million, email trails documenting 6 years of premeditated devastation. But it was the testimonies that turned the courtroom into sacred ground. Sarah Coleman spoke of Olympic dreams dissolved in a hospital waiting room. Rebecca Chen described explaining to her 6-year-old why mommy could only have supervised visits. Maria Gonzalez detailed the collapse of her catering business, built over 12 years, crumbling in 12 weeks. At 2:17 p.m., Latoya Bennett took the stand. Gone was the uncertainty that had clouded her eyes in October. She wore scrubs. She'd come straight from her shift at Emory, where she now worked in the HIV/AIDS unit. Her voice carried to every corner of the hushed courtroom. "I want to speak directly to the defendant," she began, her gaze steady on the man who had tried to destroy her. "You didn't just infect me. You attempted to colonize my future with fear. You tried to replace my dreams with nightmares, my trust with paranoia. But here's what you didn't count on. In trying to shatter us, you instead forged links between 18 strangers. We became each other's strength, each other's hope, each other's testimony that survival is possible. You thought you were writing endings. Instead, you wrote our beginnings." For the first time since his arrest, Darius's composure cracked. His left eye twitched, a hairline fracture in his carefully maintained facade. Judge Martinez's ruling came at 4:45 p.m. She removed her glasses, and her words cut through the chamber like steel through silk. "Mr. Mensah, your actions represent a calculated campaign of biological warfare against women who dared to trust you. You weaponized intimacy. You transformed love into a lethal instrument. The court sentences you to 180 years in prison, 10 years for each life you attempted to destroy. And I add one final year, not for what you did, but for the smile you wore while doing it." The gavel fell with the weight of 18 stories finding their resolution. Outside, the January snow had stopped, and weak sunshine broke through Atlanta's clouds. As the victims exited the courthouse, reporters thrust microphones forward, hungry for sound bites. But these 18 women had already told their story. Not to the media, but to each other, to the court, and to history. They descended the courthouse steps together, their footprints in the fresh snow marking the first steps of their next chapter. Atlanta's spring arrived early in 2024, painting the city in defiant blooms of dogwood and redbud. In Unit 7C at Emory University Hospital, Latoya Bennett's footsteps echoed differently now. Each step carried the weight of purpose rather than fear. Her white coat pocket held not just a stethoscope, but also a stack of support group cards, each bearing the words, "Survival is just the beginning." February brought with it the launch of the Glass Thread Foundation, named after the metaphor that had haunted Latoya's first journal entry about trust. The organization, funded partly by assets seized from Darius's accounts, offered emergency support to HIV-positive survivors of intentional transmission. Their first office, a converted Victorian in Grant Park, opened its doors on February 14th, a deliberate reclaiming of a day that had once made Latoya's heart ache with memories of Darius's calculated romance. By March, the foundation had already assisted 23 survivors across 5 states. Sarah Coleman, the former Olympic hopeful, now led their wellness program, turning her diving discipline into a source of strength for others. Rebecca Chen, reunited with her daughter after a fierce custody battle, ran support groups for parents navigating disclosure to their children. Maria Gonzalez's catering business rose from the ashes, now providing job training for survivors struggling to rebuild their careers. On April 15th, exactly 1 year after the case that shattered so many lives, Latoya stood before a packed auditorium at Emory School of Medicine. Her voice, steady and clear, carried to the last row. "Medicine taught me how to treat HIV, but surviving taught me how to live with it. Today, I'm not here to talk about viral loads or CD4 counts. I'm here to talk about the virus of silence, the epidemic of shame, and the cure that lies in our collective voice." The summer of 2024 saw the foundation expand into advocacy work. Latoya testified before the Georgia State Legislature, pushing for stronger laws against intentional HIV transmission. Her testimony, broadcast live on local news, brought lawmakers to tears. "We're not just statistics in your legal codes. We're teachers, nurses, athletes, mothers. Women who woke up one day to find our trust had become a weapon against us. But we refused to let that weapon define us. In her old apartment, now transformed into a weekend retreat from her demanding schedule, Latoya kept two things from her life before: her grandmother's armchair and the cracked bathroom mirror. The African violet on her windowsill had been replaced by a garden of succulents, hardy plants that thrived despite neglect, blooming in their own fierce way. Her journal entries, once private confessions of loneliness, now served as first drafts for speeches and articles about resilience. September 2024 marked the publication of Thread by Thread, a collection of survivors' stories that topped the New York Times bestseller list. The foreword, penned by Judge Martinez, praised not just their courage in surviving, but their determination to transform survival into advocacy. On December 1st, 2024, World AIDS Day, Latoya stood on the steps of the Atlanta courthouse where justice had been served 11 months earlier. Behind her, 17 women wore red ribbons and carried candles. But they weren't there to mourn. They were there to celebrate the passage of the Survivors Protection Act, legislation they'd fought for that strengthened penalties for intentional HIV transmission and established support systems for survivors. As twilight painted Atlanta's skyline in shades of promise, Latoya fingered the worn edge of her first journal, now filled with not just her story, but the stories of countless who'd found their way to the foundation. In its pages, fear had transformed into fury, fury into purpose, and purpose into power. The thin thread of trust, once spun from glass, had been rewoven into something stronger, a tapestry of survival, advocacy, and unwavering hope. That evening, as she locked up the Foundation's office, a young woman waited on the porch, clutching a diagnosis paper dated that morning. In her eyes, Latoya recognized the same devastation she'd once faced in her cracked mirror. But now, she could offer what she'd needed most in those dark days. Not just hope, but a roadmap to healing, drawn by those who'd already made the journey. "Come inside," Latoya said, her voice carrying the strength of 18 survivors. "Your story isn't ending, it's just beginning."